Hey, for the past 5 years I've been using After Effects to make edits, and today I've compiled 100 After Effects tips and tricks that you should know. I've divided these tips into 5 different levels, except those levels don't represent going from beginner to pro. Rather, each level covers a different aspect of After Effects. Now let's start with level 1. In this level you'll basically learn your way around After Effects. And trust me, even if you've been using it for over 2 years, you'll still want to stick around, because there are way too many underused shortcuts that could be saving you hours of editing. Tip number 1, starting off pretty nice and easy, the basic shortcuts, SPRT, scale, rotation, position, and opacity. You'll basically need these to animate any layer, and if you want to toggle multiple at once, just hit shift between each shortcut. Tip number 2, timeline navigation. If you don't want to use these sliders to move around the timeline, you can just use your mouse wheel. If you use it on its own, you'll go up and down. If you use it while holding down shift, you'll go left and right. And if you use it while holding down alt, you'll zoom in and out. And if you want to move freely, just hold down space until you see this hand and move wherever you need. Tip number 3. Now you'll notice that in After Effects when you move the playhead, there isn't that audio playback, which makes it harder to sing clips and lyrics to the songs. And a quick fix for that is holding down Ctrl while moving the playhead. Tip number 4. We all know that Ctrl Z undoes our mistakes, but did you know that Ctrl Shift Z redoes what we actually undid? Tip number 5. We all know that pressing U brings up the keyframes on a layer, but what if this layer doesn't have any keyframes? And I know I did some changes to it, but I can't recall what exactly. Well, by double pressing U, you can now see everything that was modified in this layer, including the effects. Tip number 6. A quick way to get to both ends of a layer is by pressing I and O. But what if I want to get to the end and start of a composition? Well, that leads us to tip number 7, which is, let's say I'm at the end of a composition and I go 1 frame forward. Now a lot might think that will take me to the beginning of the composition, but as you can see, it doesn't. And the same goes for the beginning of the composition. If I go 1 frame backwards, it doesn't take me to the end of the composition. And when you're working on an edit with a bunch of layers and a really big timeline, it's easier to teleport to the ends of a composition. And to do that, simply just hit the home or end key on your keyboard. Tip number 8. Let's say I'm working on a layer with a bunch of keyframes and I want to cycle through them. Well, instead of using these arrows, I can simply hit J on my keyboard to go backwards to the nearest keyframe, or K to go forward to the nearest keyframe. Tip number 9. Now let's say I want to trim this layer to 1 frame exactly. Now you might say, well, just cut the layer to 1 frame exactly and delete the rest. Or even worse, you can say drag the ends of the clip to 1 frame exactly. And to that I say, there's a reason you're watching this video. Because by simply pressing Alt and left bracket, you can trim everything that's on the left of the layer, and by pressing Alt and right bracket, you can do the same but on the right of the clip. Tip number 10. These brackets actually do more than that. If you press the left bracket on its own, you'll notice that it moves the beginning of the layer to the playhead. And if you press the left bracket, well, it does the same but to the end of the layer. Tip number 11. This is the last tip involving these brackets, but if you press Ctrl with the left bracket, you'll notice that it brings the layer down, and Ctrl right bracket simply brings the layer up. Tip number 12. We're going back to the basics. Ctrl Shift D cuts a layer, while Ctrl Shift C precomposes a layer, and don't worry about these settings, we'll come back to them later. Tip number 13. Ctrl D duplicates a layer, and trust me, this comes in handy a lot. Tip number 14. Now here's where a lot of editors waste their time. Instead of going right here, right clicking new and picking whatever they need, and the most used ones are adjustment layer, null object, and solid, you can simply press Alt Ctrl Shift Y to create a null layer, Alt Ctrl Y to create an adjustment layer, and Ctrl Y to create a solid. Of course, you can pick the dimensions, the color, and hit OK. Tip number 15. Now why are these layers the most important and most used ones when it comes to editing? Well, I'll walk you through them one by one. Basically, an adjustment layer is for applying an effect to multiple layers. As you can see, I have a mask, a duplicate of the mask, and the background. And instead of applying the effect that I need on each layer, what I can simply do is just apply it to the adjustment layer, and it does it automatically for all the visible layers. Null layers basically help with the smoothness. I'll get to that in the next levels. Solid layers are used for shapes or some specific effects that can be applied to adjustment layers. Tip number 16. Parenting layers. Basically, to summarize it, let's say I have 2 layers, the levels text and the beginner text. If I parent the beginner's text to the levels using the pick whip, now anything that happens to the parent layer, which is the levels, will also be applied to the child layer. And that could be anything: scaling, lighting, positioning, and so on. Tip number 17. Now as you can notice, so far we've only worked in the composition panel, and that's basically saying we're viewing every single layer that's in the composition in this panel. But if you have a layer and you double click it, you'll enter the layer panel, and that's where you only see the layer. And to do that with a composition, you basically alt and double click, and then you'll enter a layer panel on the composition. Now what's the use of that? Well, let's cover that in tip number 18. Well, as we said before, in the composition panel we see all of the layers, and as you can see, sometimes it becomes a lot. So let's say I want to work only on this Itachi that's in the back. Well, by going into the layer panel, I can only see this Itachi, and then I can do anything I want with it. I can mask, I can roto brush, I can do whatever I want only with this layer. So let's say I just masked it and I went back to the composition panel. As you can see, it only affected this layer which I was working on, and now I can preview it with the rest of the layers that are in the composition. Tip number 19. Now what's special about After Effects is how easy you can add motion blur to an animation. I just animated this ball going from left to right, and I feel like it could use some motion blur. Well, by just clicking on this icon, you can see motion blur is turned on, and it's way smoother now. But keep in mind, not every animation needs motion blur. We'll get to that later. Tip number 20. Another great feature of After Effects is 3D layers. And as easy as it was to turn on motion blur, you can turn a layer into a 3D layer by just clicking on this icon. We can actually see it in a 3D view. And now if we duplicate it to see the difference, we can move it in the Z axis, rotate it in 3D, and do whatever we need in 3D space. Tip number 21. Now you might think that these are the only features for layers on After Effects. Well, if you go down here and toggle switches/modes, you can see there are more secrets to After Effects. Now let's say I want to add an overlay behind Itachi, but of course I don't want the black part of it, just the fire. So by going to the blending modes, I can choose the one that fits my overlay. Tip number 22. Now let's say I don't know which blending mode to use. Well, by pressing shift and minus, I can cycle through them backwards, and shift plus cycles through them forwards. Tip number 23. Now moving on to audio editing. Let's say I have an audio and I want to see the waveform to mark beats. Well, by double pressing L, I can see the audio form, and by pressing L once, I can see the audio levels, and if I drop down here, I can see the waveforms and audio levels, and that helps when I'm keyframing, because you can get a real-time visual of how the audio is changing. Tip number 24. If you're new to After Effects, your audio waveform might look like this. Now a quick way to make it look better and more efficient is by going to the composition, right-clicking, and selecting rectified audio waveforms. Tip number 25, the last tip of level 1. Let's say I just made this thumbnail and I want to make it one frame exactly. Well, by pressing B, I can bring the left border of the composition, and by pressing N, I can bring the right border of the composition, and Ctrl-Shift-X expands it to the whole work area. Level 2. Now that you know how to navigate After Effects with ease, we'll move on to habits that will help you edit way faster. Tip number 26. Let's say I'm working on a composition and it's looking kind of busy. Well, what I like to do with the elements that I'm already done with is enabling shy layers. That's basically hiding the layers so I can focus on the ones that I'm currently working on. And to do that, just simply select this icon so it becomes flat and enable it from up here, and as you can notice, the layers are hidden. They're still there, but they are hidden. Tip number 27. Now this is more of a tool that will help you edit faster, and if you've been following me for a while, you'll notice that I use it all the time, and it's FX Console. I'll provide a link in the description. I'm not sponsored, by the way, but it literally saves the time of going up to effects and presets and searching for the effects you need, because if you simply press Ctrl space, you can immediately apply the effects that you need on the selected layer, and you can also save some presets to the numbers on your keyboard. Tip number 28. Now the best thing you can do to edit faster is saving your own presets. Now don't get me wrong, don't go borrowing presets from your friends and using them mindlessly without knowing what they actually do. But let's say I just made this light wrap around Gojo that I like a lot and I would like to use it in another project, but I don't want to go into the hassle of remaking it if I already made it the first time. So by just selecting the effects and going up to animation, save animation, I can save it to whichever directory I need, and then whenever I need it again, I can simply go up to animation, apply animation preset, and I can now apply it to any layer in any project I work on. Tip number 29, and this is something I'm sure most of you watching don't know you can be doing in After Effects. effects. So let's say I want to make a transition going into Gojo's eye. If I scale in, you'll notice it doesn't go to his eye. And some of you might suggest to also keyframe the position, which is smart, but you could be doing less steps to get the same results. And when you're trying to edit faster, you'll want to save some extra steps. So personally, I would press Y on my keyboard to get this cursor and move the anchor point to wherever I'm trying to zoom in. And now if I simply scale up, you'll notice that it goes to his eye. Tip number 30. Now let's say I just added a text to my screen by pressing Ctrl T, and now I want to animate the scale. If I move the scale up and down, you'll notice that it's coming from this point, from this anchor point. And in some animations it doesn't look good. It should be coming from the middle of the text. And a quick way to move the anchor point to the middle of the text is by pressing Ctrl Alt Home. Tip number 31. Now this also applies to text or anything you're trying to animate in your composition, but let's say I want to align this text to the middle. Now in After Effects it's really easy. There's literally an align window, and if I press on these two it will align it to the middle of the composition, but again I could be doing it in less steps. So let's say I want to align the text again. By pressing Ctrl and Home, it automatically aligns it to the middle of the composition. Tip number 32. Now a couple of tips back I used something called a pick whip to parent a layer to another. Now what if I told you that this little twirl has more to it than just parenting layers? Now you might have noticed that you can also see it next to a scale or any property, but basically let's say I have a bunch of keyframes that I want to animate the scale to, and just like layers you can parent properties to other effects. Now don't worry, we can fix that with a little expression, and now the scale moves to the keyframes. Tip number 33. Now let's say I'm working on an edit and it's getting really heavy on my laptop. As you can see, a frame is taking 5 seconds to render. That's where proxies come in. If you go to the composition, right click and create proxy, choose movie, make sure that the post render action is set to set proxy, and when it's done rendering you'll notice that it says proxy enabled. If I go back to my composition, you'll notice that it created a lower quality of my edit, but at least the frame render time is 0 and I can preview it smoothly. And when I'm actually ready to render the edit, I can simply go to the composition, disable the proxy and add it to the render queue. Tip number 34. Now if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I don't miss a beat in my edit, and that's because of markers. Other than marking beats, markers can be great to edit faster, because let's say there aren't any beats here, but I knew that I wanted some glow on the clip. Well, instead of going back to the song and seeing at which frames I need to put the glow, if I mark them earlier, it just keeps the flow going when I'm editing. Tip number 35. Let's say I have two clips and I want the same transition on both of them. Well, if I want to go fast, I can simply copy the transition from the first one onto the second, but you'll notice each clip has a different length. Now what I could do is drag the keyframe, then fix the graph, but again that's too many steps, because if I select the keyframes and hold Alt while dragging, you'll notice that the graph stays the same, and it also works to stretch clips. Now let's say I want to make this clip longer. By Alt dragging, it automatically slows it down to make it longer. Tip number 36. Another way to isolate a layer to work on, other than the ways that we've already shown, is by soloing a layer. Now how do you do that? Simply enable this dot and you'll only see the layer that you're working on. And I find this to be the most practical because you can select to view multiple layers at once. Tip number 37. Let's say I'm working on this mask and I need to see the edges, but as you can see the mask is taking too much of the edge and I can't really tweak the settings without saying what I'm working on. So to fix that, if you press Ctrl Shift H, it disables all of the masks so you can focus on what you're working on. Tip number 38. So let's say I'm working on a composition where I can move layers accidentally and I don't want to waste time fixing what I just did. Well, to prevent that, in After Effects you can actually lock layers. That way you can't move them, trim them or modify them in any way possible. Tip number 39. Now let's say you're working on a composition with a bunch of elements and you're done with most of them, but you're working on a specific element and you want to preview it on its own so it's easier on your laptop. And that's where region of interest comes in. Once you press this icon, you'll notice that your cursor changes, and if you select the region that you only want to preview, now if I play back, I can actually only see this part. That way I can work on it, and once I'm done I can alt click to reset the region of interest and disable it. Tip number 40. Now being fast with editing usually means using your mouse as little as possible. So let's say I have a composition with a bunch of layers and I want to select one of them. Well, instead of going and selecting your layer with your mouse like a caveman, you can read here the number of the layer, which is 16. And now if I type 16 using my numpad, it actually selected the layer. And that could be really useful if you have a composition with over 500 layers. Trust me. Tip number 41. Now let's say I selected the wrong layer and I actually wanted to select the layer below it. Well, by pressing Ctrl and down arrow, I can go down a layer, and Ctrl up goes up a layer. Tip number 42. Now one way to speed up the last touches of an edit, like the coloring and quality process, is by actually using a pack. And that's where my quality pack comes in. Trust me, if you feel like you've tried everything but your quality still isn't looking the best, you really wanna check it out. Because in a couple of minutes you can turn your edit from looking like this to this. And if you follow all of the instructions that I provided carefully, you can post your edit on any platform without losing a pixel of quality. I'll provide the link in the description. Tip number 43. Now this is another tool that will save you hours of editing. Let's say I just made the graph for my scale. Instead of going manually and reapplying it to all of the other properties, what I can do is copy it using Flow and applying it to the rest of the properties. And just like that, it took seconds to graph all of my transition. Tip number 44. Now if you're an editor, you know the feeling of being lost in your compositions, especially if they are a lot and if they are all open here. Now a quick way to get to a specific composition is by pressing tab. Now you can see the whole architecture of your project and you can navigate to whichever composition you need. Tip number 45. Let's say I just closed the composition on accident, but I don't want to go into the hassle of searching for it again. Well, by pressing shift and escape, it brings back the composition that was last open. Tip number 46. Now I said at the beginning of the video that we'll come back to these settings when it comes to pre-composing. Well, now's the time. First of all, leave all attributes. Now let's say I just masked this composition, but I wanted to tweak it a little before masking. Now if I go into the composition, I'll find the clip, but I don't want to make the changes on the clip itself. So if I leave the attributes on this composition, then the mask stays here, but if we go into the composition, it's pre-composed now. And now I can make the changes that I need. If you select this option, it will move all of the attributes into the new composition that you created. So if I pre-composed while using it, you'll see that the mask is no longer on this composition, but in the one that we just created. Tip number 47. Now if you're someone that forgets to enable keyframes a lot, well, you'll love this tip. Because if you go into the composition, right click it and enable auto keyframe, now everything that you modify will automatically be keyframed. Tip number 48. Now let's say you have a bunch of layers that are all over the place and you want them to be one after the other. Now if you select all of them, right click, keyframe assistant, sequence layers and hit OK, there you have it. But let's say you want some transition between each clip and the other. Well, if we do the same steps, but this time enable overlap, choose the transition that you need and select a certain duration. I'll go with 10 frames. And hit OK, you'll notice that now it will fade between the clips. Tip number 49. Now let's say I'm making an overlay for my clip and I want to export it to use it later, but I still need the clip as a guide. Well, if you go to the clip, right click it and turn it into a guide layer, now when you render your overlay, it will render without the clip. Tip number 50. Now let's say you're working with a really high resolution footage and every time you go to modify something, it takes some time to compute it. Well, to fix that, if you go over to the quality and sampling and click it until you see this rod, you'll notice that your layer will lose some quality and that will make stuff load faster. Level 3. In this level will make your animation feel smoother and more professional. Because what's the use of being fast if your work looks like it was made on a toaster? Tip number 51. Of course, to animate you need keyframes. Now keyframes usually have multiple shapes and the ones that you're gonna see the most are this one and this one. Now the difference between them, the linear keyframe you can't really edit, contrary to the easy eased one. I forgot to record tip number 52 and it basically is you can easy ease keyframes using the F9 key. Tip number 53. You'll notice that when you animate a position and you go to edit the graph, even if it's easy eased, you can't really do that. And that's because when you want to graph a position, you have to separate the dimensions. And now you can graph each one on its own. This also applies to scale. Now you don't have to separate the dimensions, but what could be helpful sometimes is animating the X scale and Y scale separately. And to do that, just unlink them by pressing on this icon. Tip number 54. Now if you want to save some time, you don't have to separate the dimensions each time you edit the position. If you use the tool that I mentioned before, Flow, if you apply a graph, it will apply it for both positions. Tip number 55. Now let's head to the graph editor. Even though it looks plain, the graph editor actually has a lot of features. First of all, if you find yourself losing your graph a lot, you might have this feature disabled. And what it does is basically keep the graph full screen screen the whole time. Also, other features that I know a lot of you are not using. First of all, if you go down here, you can see that you can enable a bunch of stuff. If you wanna copy my settings, here you go. I have this one enabled so that anytime I have a marker on my layer, I can see it in the graph editor. I also have the ins and outs of my layer because let's say my layer is smaller than the composition. When I'm editing the graph, I can actually see where my layer ends. Tip number 56. Now you might have noticed before people using a graph that looks different to this one, and that would be the speed graph. To summarize the speed graph, the higher the curve, the faster the animation will be. As you can see on the y-axis, you can see the percentage of the speed, and based off of that you can animate it. So here it will start slow, ramp up, reach maximum speed around here, then go back down and finish off slow. Tip number 56. Now going back to the previous graph, the value graph. Here, as the name suggests, we're only going off values. So as you can see, I started with a 100 scale and went up to 170. So on the y-axis, I can see the values from 100 to 170. So if I graph it like this, you'll notice that in one frame, it goes from 100 to around 150 immediately. Tip number 58. Now let's just say we made a really quick pop animation, but we don't want to waste time editing the graph. Here's where keyframe velocity comes in. So if I put each one to around 77%, you'll notice that it graphed itself. Tip number 59. This is something you definitely should know when you're time remapping, and that's frame blending. By going to this icon and pressing it once, you'll notice that now the frames are blending in a strange way. There's also the second mode, which is way smoother, and I personally use it a lot. And of course, frame blending, as the name suggests, is just blending the frames together, so your time remapping looks smoother. Tip number 60. I'm sure you've seen this effect in most edits, especially in motion graphics edits, and it's posterized time. Basically with this effect, even if my composition is at 30 FPS, I can make my animation 12 FPS, which sometimes, in very rare cases, might look smoother, but as you can see, not in this one. Tip number 61. Now this is something I've mentioned before, but contrary to popular beliefs, adding motion blur to something doesn't automatically make it smoother. For example, this edit from Xenos has no motion blur at all, but still when you watch it, it's really smooth. Tip number 62. This is something you should understand when you want to make smooth animations. You always gotta keep in mind that your animation should always have motion. So for example, as the zoom out is ending, the zoom in is already starting, and that leaves no time for the clip to be still. Tip number 63. Now as I said before, we'll come back to null layers later. Well, now's the time. As I just said, in order to have smooth animations, you always need motion, and null layers help with that. If you parent a clip to two null layers, you can start a movement before the first one ends, and that's mainly the purpose of null layers. Tip number 64. Now a really good way to always have motion and in return have smooth animations are shakes. Now that could be position shakes, S shake, or any type of shake that keeps the motion flowing, and that includes impact shakes between the clips, the most popular one being Twitch. Tip number 65. Now a little trick that I always do to keep the motion flowing even if I don't have any shakes or anything to add to the transition is a slow linear scale. For example, after this transition, this zoom in transition, I added a little linear zoom in going from 100% to 104, and that made the animation have motion even though the first transition was already over. Tip number 66. This is a tool that you can use to literally animate anything, the puppet tool, and it's really simple how it works. You simply add some points onto the objects you're animating, either a point to lock them in space or a point to move them around. I personally use it to animate characters in my edits. Tip number 67. To save some time while animating, there's actually a hidden feature about the puppet tool. Let's say I'm animating this tree to go from side to side. What I could do is go through the timeline and add some keyframes, but to make it way faster, I can hold down Ctrl, and now when I move the point, it will animate in real time. Tip number 68. For some reason, the squishier the animation, the more the human will enjoy it. I don't know, we're just weird like that. And a really good effect that could help you add some stretch or squishiness to your animation is warp. There's a lot of warp styles, but the one that I use the most when it comes to animations is squeeze. I made a little demo on this clip so you can see what I mean, but as you can notice, it starts really stretched out, then goes back to normal. Tip number 69. Another effect that you don't really expect to use to have the squishy animation is transform. In the transform effect, there's something called skew, and if you play with the values, you'll notice it will stretch the clip. I also made a little demonstration for this effect. Tip number 70. Another really popular effect that you can be using in your animation to elevate it is turbulence displace. Now with this effect, you have infinite possibilities. I won't really go into details with this effect, but I'll link some helpful tutorials for it in the description. Tip number 71. This is the last effect in this level, but I've been finding myself using it more and more in my recent edits. and it's optics compensation. This effect really has one main purpose, which is warping the clip either this way or this way, and you can go wild with it. Tip number 72. Now this is something that really shows the difference between a beginner animator and an advanced animator, and it's something that I like to call animation extras. Basically, let's say I have this animation. It's just a ball going down, but as you can see, the way it ends the animation is really stiff. So what I personally usually do is add a little extra animation to the end of it so that it becomes smoother. Tip number 73. Now what's really cool about After Effects is how you can animate text. If we simply drop down here next to the text, you'll notice something that says animate. If we press on this icon next to it, you can see there are way too many options to animate with. But basically you can animate the position, scale, rotation, opacity, whatever you need for each character of your text, or if you have a paragraph, even each word on its own. I'll make a little demo for you right now. I won't go into too much details, but if you need a tutorial on that, let me know in the comments. Tip number 74. Now this is a free tool that will really help you with animation, and it's Animation Composer 3. I'll provide a link in the description as usual, but you can get their starter pack for free, and trust me, it helps a lot with animation. It has a bunch of presets for 2D layers, 3D layers, text layers, and even some pre-made elements. Tip number 75. Now I just made a really simple opacity animation for this text layer, and you'll notice it's under a section called Animator 1. And that's the cool thing about this animate feature, is that it doesn't have any limits. Now let's say you just animated the opacity in Animator 1, but you need to animate the opacity again to do something else. Well, the cool thing is, if you go back up to animate and you animate the opacity again, it will create another animator, and it literally doesn't have any limit. Now at this level of editing, you're pretty much making decent edits. But you'll notice that from here on out, you'll always have one main problem, which is finding clips or footage for your edits. And that's where WayinVideo comes in. It's literally the best tool to find anime or movie clips without scrubbing through full episodes. Let me walk you through it. Basically, you either upload the episode/video or just paste the link, then search for the exact moment you want. And if you have no idea which clip to use, just search a character's name or even an emotion or action you're editing for that video, and it pulls a bunch of matching clips. Then pick the one that fits your edit either by the flow or virality score, reframe, caption, do all of the editing you need, and hit export. It literally saves the most time consuming part of making an edit. Anyways, you can now claim 200 free credits to try it out using the link in the description. Level 4. In this level, we'll cover everything that will make any project you work on look cinematic and professional, while only using After Effects built-in features. Tip number 76. A really important process that you should be taking your time on is color grading. I previously made a tutorial on that, but it covers the basics of making a color correction. But the first step before starting all of that is actually knowing what are the main colors for your edit. And a really simple rule that I actually go by is the complementary colors rule. Basically, you need a color wheel, and the colors that are opposite each other are called complementary colors. Basically, if you pick one color, the one that's opposite to it should be the second main color. Personally, in my edits, I go for a blue/cyan color with a red to orange color. Tip number 77. Now sometimes it happens that you have only one main color in your edit, and that's completely fine. As you can see in this edit that I made, orange is the main color. And in this case, you basically want your main color to be the only saturated one, and you desaturate all of the rest of the colors. But that becomes more complicated because that type of color grading doesn't suit every clip. Tip number 78. Now when it comes to the final touches, like the quality and color correction, in the process some of you might use brightness and contrast. But trust me, there is an effect that's way better, and it's curves. With curves, you can actually play with the highlights, midtones, and shadows. Whereas with the brightness and contrast, you don't really have that flexibility. Tip number 79. Other effects that are used in the final touches to make the quality better are sharpen and unsharp mask. Now if you've watched my color correction tutorial, I covered these effects really well. But if you want some actual presets for them, you know what to check out. Tip number 80. Now in some cases, to add realism to your edit, you can add an effect called noise. I personally go for noise or noise HLS. I usually set it to around 18%, and as you can see, it adds that noise that isn't too harsh on the eye. Tip number 81. Now in the next few tips, we'll cover more of the compositing aspect of After Effects. Now the tool that for many years was a very special feature of After Effects that most softwares didn't have is Rotobrush, and it's gotten way better in the newer versions of After Effects. But basically Basically, to use it, just select the roto brush, double click on a composition, and select whatever you need to mask. Now let's say it selected something that we don't need. By pressing Alt, your cursor will turn red. And now whatever you paint won't be added to your roto brush. And please, once you finish roto brushing your clip, freeze your roto brush. Tip number 82. Now let's say you have a mask, but it's not the cleanest. An effect that could help with that is key cleaner. Key cleaner basically gives you that smooth edge on your masks, and sometimes when you have really tight spaces in your masks that you can't really get with the roto brush, it takes care of that. Tip number 83. Another great effect that you can implement with key cleaner is spill suppressor. As you can see, it changed the color of the mask a little, and this effect is usually used with clips that have a solid color behind them, and there's always that spill like the blue line here around Itachi. And to fix that, basically select the color that's annoying you and play around with the suppression. Tip number 84. Another effect that you'll basically see every editor use when it comes to compositing is optical flares. It's a really good light source when it comes to 3D scenes. Like for example in this composite that I made, if I solo it out, you'll see how much it actually affects the clip. And that's not its only use. In the same composite, I actually used optical flares to add some blur to the camera. Tip number 85. Another effect that's really important for compositing is light sweep. Now light sweep can be used in a lot of ways, on texts, on characters, basically on everything. But I personally use it to create that light around the character. And not just characters, any elements of the scene. Tip number 86. Now another great effect that's similar to light sweep is light trap. Now this effect is softer, but I personally usually go with light sweep because you can have more control over it. But there are some cases when I use light trap instead. Tip number 87. And that's adding shadows. Because of course if there's light coming from one point, there will be shadows on the other side. So if you solo out Gojo on his own, you'll notice there's light sweep and there are also shadows. Now if you want some in-detail tutorial on the lighting and the shadows, let me know in the comments. Now the thing is, most editors stop here. They put the highlights, they put the shadows, and they think that's enough for the compositing part. Well, trust me, there's still a lot more, and there might be a little secret in level 5. Anyways, tip number 88. Another thing you should consider while compositing is the tone of the character. As you can see, the scene is pretty purple, but if we look at Gojo with his initial colors, you'll see there's no purple at all. And if you look at it in the composition, you'll see that it doesn't match. So some great effects to match the tone are CC toner or even tritone. Tip number 89. Another thing you should consider while compositing is the depth. As you can see in this scene, it's the perfect example. Way far in the background, we have the mansion. Then a little closer, you'll see the bats. Then we get to Gojo. Now the easiest way if we don't have a camera in our composition to have depth is by adding some kind of blur. Now I personally go for this one because you can control the gamma. Tip number 90. Now let's say I have this overlay or any type of overlay and I wanted to affect the clip the way it's already doing here, and that's where displacement map comes in. These are my usual settings, you can copy them, but it can add to any composition you're working on. Tip number 91. For some reason, humans also like things that are shiny. I don't know, we basically like squishy and shiny things. And as you can see here, this effect really adds some shine, and it's CC light rays. Using it is really simple, but yet it adds a lot to the clip. And here's another example of how you could use it. Tip number 92. This is something that's really important when it comes to compositing, that you should always take into consideration to have a realistic look in your composition. Basically in this frame, we'll focus on this overlay. Basically in this tip, we'll talk about perspective. As you can see, the ground is tilted that way, and we can tell by the shadows of the shoes. Now anyways, if I show you how the original overlay looked like, it was like that. Now if I moved it a little so it becomes under the shoe, you can see there's no perspective at all, and the overlay is basically going into the ground. But when I fixed it, you can now see it goes with the ground. Now the effect I used to achieve that was corner pin, but if you find it too complicated, you can always make the layer into a 3D layer and 3D orient the overlay how you need it. Tip number 93. This is also something you should work on if you're trying to achieve realism, and it's proportions. Basically we'll take this mask as the example. If you go into the composition and take the mask that Gojo is holding, if I unparent it and go to put it on Gojo's head, you'll see that it's actually in the scale of a mask that he would wear if he got a haircut. But that's basically what I'm saying. If this mask was any bigger or smaller, it wouldn't look realistic. Tip number 94. Now let's say you're compositing and you're working on shadows. Well, if I enable the shadows, you'll see that it spills over the mask of Gojo. And the effect that fixes that is set matte. I literally use this effect all of the time because it literally can be used for anything. Let's say replacing a phone screen or anything that could be spilling outside of a border, you can use set matte and it fixes it. Tip number 95. The last tip before we get into the serious territory. Here I have arguably my best composition yet. But in this tip, I want to talk about the environment. You see, to make a good composition, the elements of the scene have to make sense. So let's say I added fire everywhere. The fire produces ambers, and that's why there are some orange particles. But also they look like they are in a very ruined place, and that's why there are some dust particles. So your environment always has to make sense. And that's why in this scene I also added some bats, because this is supposed to be a haunted mansion. And name me one movie where they are in a haunted mansion and you don't see bats. So the main idea of this tip is, don't add random stuff and expect people to go, wow, this is good because he spent a lot of time on this. No, actually make something that makes sense, and trust me, it will be way more impressive. Level 5. The real sauce. Tip number 96. Depth maps. Now before I get into how you can use depth maps, you should understand what they are. Basically, the whiter the object, the closer it is to the camera, and the darker the object, the further it is away from the camera. So now you're getting the depth part of it. Now personally, to generate depth maps, I use something called depth anything. But if you want to do your own research, there are plenty of tools online. Tip number 97. Now I've mentioned before that depth is really important when it comes to compositing. And I said that one way to do it is using some blur effects. And now with depth maps, you can even take it one level higher. So after I'm done with my composition and I created my depth map, I added camera lens blur on an adjustment layer. And here where it says blur map, I linked my depth map. And by playing with the focal distance, I made anything that's further away from the camera have more blur to it. Tip number 98. Now I said before, most people stop when they have the lighting, the shadows, the elements and all of that. But there is one effect that's really underused when it comes to compositing, and it's heat wave. If we compare with and without the effect on this scene, you'll notice it makes a lot of difference. And especially because I have some fire in my scene, it adds that little bit of realism. Now these are my settings, but of course they don't work on any scene, you'll have to tweak them a little. Tip number 99. Now you might have seen this tip in some TikToks where they create keyframes for an audio and they say it's easier to sync to beats because now you can see where the audio peaks. Well, I'll tell you, it's not the best way to sync, but nonetheless, you can still use these keyframes to make a lot of stuff. For example, to animate particles to a specific song, or even a character that sings to your talking, like the one you've been seeing this whole video. Wait, did you think I was animating it keyframe by keyframe like a caveman? Click off the video. Tip number 100. I never thought I'd be saying this anytime soon. It's been days of recording, but at last we're here. And this tip has to do with syncing. I always get asked how I never miss a beat in my edits, and now I'm revealing the secret. Now you could use some of the previous tips that I've already covered to sync to beats, but I have something way better. Basically, when you're listening to a song, you can kind of see where the beats might be. But the thing is, sometimes some beats are not really visible. Now what I personally do is slow down the playback to 15 frames per second. Now when I listen to the song, I listen to an even slower version of it. And that way I can pinpoint where exactly I need my keyframes. That will have to conclude today's video. I hope you learned a lot today. If you found it useful, let me know in the comments. And who knows, maybe I'll make a part 2. But until then, stay safe. I love you all. Peace.
Der Wörter geht gestört, braucht nicht mal ne Melodie, dein Demo kurz gehört.